We're going to segue for a minute into something that seems completely unrelated, but when we come back to brick on the next video, you'll understand why. As you can see, we're going to take this side trip to look at concrete shells. Concrete shells set the pace for architectural modernism in the 20th century. Elegantly curved forms, however, require an immense amount of formwork, as you can see in this image to the left. All of that wooden scaffolding has to be in place in order for the concrete to be poured onto its surface and create those elegant shapes. To do this costs thousands of dollars, along with stockpiles of lumber, just to make the scaffolding to support the structure that was eventually desired. While curved shells like the ones shown here seem to defy gravity, the formwork and its environmental footprint argued otherwise. Some of the most famous concrete shell architects and engineers of the mid-20th century include Eduardo Torroja, Robert Mallet, and Felix Candela. If you're interested in this, look up their names. They've done spectacular projects. Felix Candela is one of my favorites. An outstanding project very early in the development of concrete forms is this Hippodrome by Eduardo Torroja. Elegant, it seems to just float up there in the sky. I love this image with the clouds as you have this brilliant cantilevered covering for the stadium below, jutting out into the clouds as if it could launch itself, almost like a bird wing. This stadium roof for the Zarzuela Stadium is one of the most elegant, seemingly gravity-defying forms that came out of this period of concrete shell design. They look like lightly creased paper, and they're heavy, heavy, heavy concrete and steel structures. It's really an engineering marvel, not only in its elegance, but also the stadium was designed to make sure that sound quality was optimized for every seat in the stadium, as well as providing shade across the entire audience that would sit there. If you look very closely at this image, you can see the board form imprint in the concrete shell. Board forms are exactly what they sound like. They are forms made out of boards. And you can see where each board stopped and started, their length, their cutoff. When this process was being developed, the board form gave concrete a scalability, much like the brick, where you could tell what relationship it might have to the human body. Without that, one wouldn't know, if you were looking at an image of the building in particular, or looking at the building from a distance, you'd have a harder time figuring out just how wide is that span, just how tall is that arch. So again, like brick, these elements of human scale materials helped to give a familiarity to this new wild use of concrete. One of the most outstanding projects in concrete shells, or at least the one that is the most famous, is this cement hall by Robert Maillard. He designed this for a Swiss exhibition. The exhibition was in 1938. The project was taken down altogether in 1939, so all we have remaining are the photos. Still, it made such a splash on the architectural scene that so many shell-formed buildings that you see even today took their inspiration from this early work. In a famous book called Space, Time, and Architecture, written by the architectural historian Siegfried Giedion, he recognized, quote, that in the hands of a great engineer, this pavilion, conceived only to combine strength and the utmost lightness, became a work of art. What's he talking about? Take a minute to look at the structure. What does it mirror that we've seen before? Jot down some notes. What are we looking at? Beyond that curved, thin shell, what's happening with the support structure below? What's familiar about those forms? Where have we seen this kind of work before? So the description of this cement hall is that the thin shell of the vault is both expressive, meaning artistic, and integrated, meaning it's engineeringly sound. The thin shell of the vault is fully exposed, yet the vault could not stand without those accompanying structural elements below. We recognize them in the form of columns. You could even see flying buttresses in these extended bits of cement that come out from those center columns and create a second layer of columns that sort of, almost they look like the outer legs of the structure. What's happening is that the lateral thrust of the vault is resisted by those horizontal slabs. Those slabs are pushing it in like you would push a piece of paper if you were trying to make it arc on a tabletop. At the same time, the arch ribs stiffen the vault over its central supports, and the vault acts as a cantilever beam in the longitudinal direction. So if you went to the top of the arch and you ran, imagine your finger, if this was something smaller, from the front loop of the arc to the back, that's the longitudinal axis. Basically what's happening here is that Maillart is using the structure of the arch to do something that hadn't been done before. We've seen elegant arches in Gothic cathedrals. They always have groin vaults, some sort of supporting vaulting that's making their height, their expressive gestures possible. Here Maillart is using geometry itself, physics itself, to do this. By the time Maillart did this, he was 67 years old. He was a mature architect. He'd been working on the problems of structural engineering in concrete and in cement for most of his very impressive career. And as I mentioned, although this was taken down, it has been one of the seminal works of modern architectural design. We'll look at a few spots where that influence is clear. What are we looking at here? I have the name, of course, written on the slide so you can see that it's an airplane hangar, but we are looking at a vaulted structure not unlike the structures that we saw in Maillart's cement work. This one doesn't have that buttressed columned support. Instead, the way that the metal is shaped, and if you've ever seen these up close, they're often used for farm structures. They could be barns, they could be grain storage. If you've seen them up close, you'll know that that ribbing on the side undulates back and forth, up and down. And that creates the rigidity and the strength inside this shell structure. Before these were created for farm purposes or for industrial purposes. They were built as airplane hangars. They were military structures built at the beginning of World War I. They were quick to construct, efficient in their use of materials, and you could easily fit large items like airplanes and military warcraft into them for storage and protection. I say that it's easy to construct, but it requires a resource-rich bank behind it. In order to create a large metal shell, you have to have the funding power to purchase all of that metal. There are large regions of the world where that's not possible. Same was true of concrete. Because of all that formwork, it's very expensive. If you wanted to create these beautiful, elegant, arched forms, there had to be a lot of money involved. And on that note, we'll return to the idea of the brick.